comrades, to have your say on the class war, that little subject there. Thank you for joining us tonight. And, it's funeral night, and you're here with us instead of watching whatever it is they're doing now. They've been dragging this thing out for the last 10 days. Almost unbearable. I think the worst should be over by tonight. But if anybody on the left has any doubt that the monarchy is far, far more than a boring side issue or a diversion from the class struggle, I think they were told a valuable lesson in this period. It's very much the monarchy and our struggle against it. It's very much part of class society and capitalism. Last week, we discussed a few things, how it is part and parcel of an extremely right-wing government agenda to attack the unions, to attack civil liberties, to attack free speech, attack the right to protest. And I think what we're seeing is actually that the system, the fact that they're putting billions and billions of pounds into this, charade that we've been watching over the last 10 days, has actually meant that it's actually quite a weak system rather than a strong system. And I think we've been seeing that quite a lot in the last few days. Sorry about that, comrades. Please do not unmute yourself. I've forgotten to switch on the right thing, so please mute yourself, because otherwise you can't hear us, and you're here to hear us, we think. But this is your show, actually. We want everybody to participate tonight. We want to discuss some of the issues we've discussed last week or any other issues that have come up. And if you want to make a contribution, please click raise hand. We might pick you up on something, though, so don't think you can just say what you want. We might question you on what you've said. We're going to start with Jackie Walker, who's going to look at the last 10 days to get us going tonight. Jackie.
Oh God, has it actually been 10 days? It seems like it's been an absolute eternity. But I'm going to give you my reflections on what I've been thinking when I've been watching and seeing the odd thing and looking at social media as well. And I know not everybody follows it as closely as I do. So I'm going to pick apart some of the images that we were foregrounded with by the establishment. And then the first thing I wanted to start with was this image of the Queen with Paddington Bear. And I thought actually that was really quite a good place to start, because here you have the kind of cuddly face of British culture, and that animation that she did made everybody sort of go, oh, she's just like our granny, isn't she? She's the nation's granny. By the way, she's a granny who the week before she died was looking after her stable, planning for the extension of her stable, I think of 50 or 100 horses. But what was interesting, with all the marmalade sandwiches and all the teddy bears that were being put out and all the talk of Paddington, there was not one mention of the fact that the big message, of course, of Paddington is about refugees and migrants, because that's what they didn't want to talk about. They wanted a totally sanitized version, a nationalized version of what the funeral of the Queen would be like. And in fact, what we saw on social media and actually in the newspapers was some unprecedented levels of racism. Anybody who's on social media must have seen that, not just towards individuals who were commenting, who were perhaps not as supportive, who were reminding people about uncomfortable truths about the history of the British Empire and of British imperialism, but there were some pretty awful comments going on about Meghan. I was very interested, though, that what we are seeing is an attempt to make our monarchy into these sort of demigods. And there was constant references to the sudden appearances of rainbows and how the skies opened with sunlight. And of course, what we saw with this phenomenon of the queue was itself very interesting. Any of you know anything about ancient societies, you'd know that when the monarch dies, when the leader dies, when the chieftain dies, somebody would have to die with them and go into the grave. People would have to suffer and sacrifice themselves. And the queue became the way that you could show your ability to have pain. There was one woman on television, sorry, I can't help laughing, television yesterday. She said, do you know what? She said, I enjoyed it even more than having my children. I mean, can you believe that one? Yes, yeah. But I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? We saw these huge crowds of people. Somebody made a joke, actually, was that the next queue that is forming is the queue of people waiting for NHS treatment that was cancelled, of course, for the Queen's funeral. We also saw celebrities skipping the queue to pay their respects to the Queen's coffin. Now, I don't know why people complained about that, because the monarchy is all about people skipping queues. They skip the queues in all sorts of ways. So I didn't see the problem with that, but there you go. It's a strange, strange world, isn't it? We also had the message, because remember, we have to make the monarchy as if they're godlike. They're actually higher than politics. Politics doesn't touch them. They never put a foot wrong. That's the other thing we heard. They never put the foot wrong. And I thought to myself, I'm old enough to remember the stories of the New Cross fire, when neither the Queen nor Margaret Thatcher sent a message of condolence to the Black community when that happened, when in fact the previous week there'd been a house fire in Wales, which the Queen had sent a message to. And that doesn't even speak about, if you remember, all the problems that happened with the way that the Queen and the royal family responded to Princess Diana's death. We then got treated to the most extraordinary pronouncements on what the Queen was like. You know, we were told that she had beautiful skin, her eyes were radiant, you know, her hair was always perfect. So she becomes this godlike form. And yesterday we also have the excerpt of idiot man Lindsay Hoyle, the speaker, telling us that today's funeral was going to be the most important historical event ever. Not this year, but ever. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And it went on and on like that. The worst thing for me, though, was definitely Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. You know, talk about the Church of England being the Conservative Party at prayer. I mean, you know, he said, quote today, these are hard times for the people ahead, but the most important thing is that there was a seamless change in the head of state. And I think that gives us a real good clue about why this was so important. Because it's not actually so important about Queen Elizabeth. What's really important is that the change of regime that we're seeing now from Elizabeth to Charles and now in the Tory party happens in a seamless way. So the establishment is in no way disturbed. And this was policed really, really effectively. But you know, it's not actually going to manage to what I would call whitewash the legacy of the monarchy, because we had certain echoes of resistance. And I'll just give you a few of the stories that I certainly heard. There was a room full of women of South Asian heritage who had gone to an exercise class, and their teacher told them that she would only teach them if they turned up wearing red, white, and blue to honour the Queen. And if they didn't do that, they would have to do press-ups. And many of the women, of course, walked out. And we saw this again with this enforced grieving, with the closure of feed banks, because, you know, if you're poor, you've got to be hungry to actually adore your Queen. We saw park facilities being locked. We saw centre parks being closed. We saw bird watching being banned for the day. And very interestingly, we saw the football cancelled. Now, first of all, I thought they were cancelling and that they were going to cancel all the sport, but noticeably they didn't. And what became clear is the reason why it was cancelled was that they would be scared that the crowds wouldn't be appropriately servile. And so it was true, it was absolutely right. We saw Celtic fans singing, "If you hate the royal family, clap your hands," during that point when they were supposed to be clapping for the Queen. Now, whoever thought of that is a genius because, of course, the establishment didn't have a clue what to do, did they? And I mean, when you think of, some people think, why are Celtic fans like that? Well, just think, even to the most recent history, we have a king now who is the head of a regiment who on Bloody Sunday went in and actually shot dead over 20 civilians. So that's why they are still angry and still resistant. And I have to say, I feel pretty proud of the way that they've behaved because they are totally unmoved by the nonsense we're getting. But it's been a very good time, hasn't it, to sneak in some policies. So we've seen the Tories getting in fracking. They've also made announcements about these economic zones that they're going to establish where global corporations are going to go, I think it is for something like 10 or 12 regionally chosen towns and cities where they're going to be outside of UK taxation and they're going to have totally different rules to our national rules. I mean, this is absolutely phenomenal when you think about it. But where I was living, there were no pictures of the Queen up. I'm living in London. There were no pictures of the Queen up. There was no Union Jacks draped outside. There were no discussions. So I think what we have seen is a nation that is actually quite split. Yes, of course, there were crowds going up, but there were also many, many people and many ordinary people, not political people, who were really angry with the fact that appointments for their grandparents had been closed, that they couldn't go and use swimming bars, that they couldn't choose how to spend that time. And we've really got some interesting times coming up. And just say, I read in the Financial Times that the average Slovenian household will now be better off than their British counterparts by 2024. That we have such an astonishing drop in living happening. We are actually going to become what they're now calling a country of the poor. So new income inequality in the US and UK is going to be so wide that while the richest will be very well off, the poorest will have a poorer outcome than the poorest countries in Europe. So here we have what's going to be happening. Now, the light in the tunnel in all this, what was it? Clive Lewis coming out in his article expressing really pretty much everything that I've expressed today, but in slightly milder forms. But it did make me wonder, where were our leaders? Where was the rest of the Socialist Campaign Group? They obviously took seriously Starmer's indictment to actually be silent. And we know, don't we, that we are just about to enter the conference season. And what we have been told is Starmer is going to begin the Labour Party conference this year with a rendition of what I now call the King's Anthem, not the national anthem, but the King's Anthem, and then is going to do a eulogy, not just to the Queen, but to the new King. Well, brave new world for Labour. Let's see what happens.
Thank you, Jackie. I would be surprised if there weren't some people at Labour Party conference booing. Obviously, most of the left has been shut out and expelled and suspended or stopped from becoming delegates, etc. But if you're a delegate and you're going, I mean, do feel encouraged to boo for all of us, because we certainly all would if we were there. Perhaps we should stand outside and boo there or something. It's 10:45, I believe, on the Saturday. They're going to play the national anthem. So maybe we should all stand on our doorsteps and boo at that particular time. Ridiculous. My daughter was forced to pray in school, a state school, I should add, for the Queen, which really wound me up. It is really all encompassing. Mike, you're Scottish, and we've played that little clip of Celtic fans, as Jackie mentioned. Is there a lot of that kind of protest against the Queen, or against the sort of making of King Charles? Oh, you're quiet.
Can you hear me okay now? Yeah. There has been the football has been a platform for dissent. There's no doubt about it. It's given an opportunity for working class people to voice their dissent. And it's not only been Celtic fans, it was predictable that would happen. As Jackie and others are saying, Celtic Football Club emerged out of the Irish immigrant population in the West Coast, in Glasgow in particular, and they have long had a Republican sense of identity and resistance. It's particularly focused amongst the Green Brigade, who are deeply politicised, whether we would all agree with their politics and their variation of left-wing politics and republicanism is another matter, but they are very vocal. They've run into the odd tension with Celtic Football Club. It's interesting that this week that Celtic as a club have put out a statement saying we have always supported the monarchy, which will come as a surprise to a lot of Celtic fans and the club as a whole. But it also happened to Dundee United fans. It happened with Hibs fans. It happened to Hearts fans. Now, to be candid, within those fans, there is, of course, disagreement. Even among Celtic fans, there's some measure of pushback against the Green Brigade. Some Celtic fans are unhappy with the nature of the message, the timing of the message. There's also, we always have to remember up here, the anti-monarchism is refracted through nationalist politics. And that interestingly shows a split within the Yes movement up here as well, because the SNP have always been supportive and are still supportive of retaining the monarchy in an independent Scotland. That's still their formal position. They don't want to scare the horses and they don't want to upset the establishment. So Nicola Sturgeon was very vocal and very effusive in her praise for the Queen and for the institution of the monarchy by extension. So the politics are a wee bit different up here. And of course, the crowds in Edinburgh, notwithstanding the protesters who got themselves in a wee bit of trouble and spoke, I think, really, really well for all of us. The crowds were huge, but I think we also have to remember, and I'm sure this was the case in London as well, that there's a great many tourists there. There's a great many ambulance chasers there. They just want to gawk at a spectacle, at theatre. So it's difficult to gauge. And as others, I guess the last thing, it is a strange spectacle, this kind of supernatural Bonapartist deity hovering over us all and mediating, from on high, the meagre affairs of men and women. There's a strange superstition almost amongst the more conservative parts of the population. But I think people have said as much last week and in the chat box as well. It feels like overcompensating, doesn't it? That there's a real anxiety amongst the establishment and a real fear amongst the ruling class that there is big trouble around the corner and they do not have the personnel in place that could meaningfully persuade people to batten down the hatches and limit their dissent. So I think there's a real fear there, and possibly the slightly unhinged celebrations and the clamping down on dissent this week is probably telling.
Thanks, Mike. And it's quite telling, isn't it? I mean, they do try to present King Charles as, the natural following, its consistency, etc. Nothing will change, just accept him now. What's he done in his first week? He sacked 100 people during a mass service in church. He, we showed that little clip of him telling off his employees for not, providing him with a big enough table, and threw that pencil across the room when it leaked a bit. I mean, the man will provide us with lots and lots of opportunities, I think, to push the Republican agenda. Graham, you were going to say something as well, weren't you?
I was. Well, Mike's right. There is trouble around the corner. Forget the circus, which is soon coming to an end. The monarchy itself will be in decline with Charles III, with the moves towards disestablishing the monarchy in Belize, Bahamas, Jamaica, and other Commonwealth countries as well. But I don't think that the centre of resistance will be focused very much on the monarchy in the first instance. We are facing a huge number of different interlocking crises, the economic crisis, and of course the political crisis. I said it before, but the Tories, I think, have made a mistake in electing Truss. And it means, I think, that Starmer could well be forming a government in the next couple of years. And with an emerging trade union movement, that is going to mean, I think, huge conflicts between a Labour government and the trade union movement. So that is going to be the centre of struggle, and any Republican movement, anti-monarchy movement, will arise from that resistance at those fundamental levels. So I don't think the monarchy is a distraction, but I don't also think that it is the central question which will determine the future and the outcome of the huge struggles that we are going to face in the next months and years.
Yeah, we might slightly disagree on that one, as we do on a few issues. Them pouring millions and millions into this charade at the moment, while people are unable to, buy food, heat their houses, and sit in the cold. I think this will serve to underline the class society and the class war we're in. And this is, as we said, this is the reason why they're pouring millions, if not billions, of pounds into making this overall, the nation, we're all in it together, because this period is quite so fraught and so politically fluid, and where everything and anything could happen. And I think that discrepancy between them and us, like it was with Diana, who would have thought that the death of a princess would almost kill off the monarchy? But they were so close, because they just didn't get it. They didn't get how normal people live. They didn't know what they thought about Diana, that she was, one of us, no matter how wrong or that was, or right that was. But it's so all sorts of things can kick off all sorts of other things, can't they? So who knows? I mean, we'll see. But it's certainly part of the struggle, surely, to overcome capitalism and class society. The struggle against monarchy is an integral part of that. I take issue with organizations who say, that doesn't matter, that was it's boring, the stuff has nothing to do with it. They're just spending a lot of money on the monarchy, and that's the main problem. It's not. It's an integral part of ruling class ideology, as we're now seeing, and keeping us down. If we accept somebody's born to rule over us, we'll accept anything. And I think that is a crucial part of actually keeping us in our place, etc. And seeing this parade of dictators, mass murderers, billionaire fraudsters coming into Buckingham Palace last night for, ahead of the funeral. That compared to, how normal people live. I think these kind of things, they didn't publish a guest list, by the way. It was prohibited from publishing a guest list, because there are all sorts of bastards amongst that palace party yesterday, which is very interesting. They're usually quite keen to have all the names out, but not this time. So there is something brewing, and certainly the class struggle and the unions, etc., is part of that brewing. And I think they're very aware which is also, as we discussed last week, these various laws that are being now put through, stopping us from protesting, stopping free speech, etc. I think they are sensing something is coming, something will change, and something has to change, and they are making preparations to stop us in our tracks. We want to open now up for the audience. Jackie, Graham, Mike, if you want to speak, just put your hand up and we can bring you in. Comrades, if you want to make a contribution or ask a question of anybody in particular, or just say something, please click raise hand and we can bring you in. Marion was first. Hi, comrade.
Hi, I think this is a really important discussion, and I agree with a lot of that's already been said. I think what we have to recognise is we've been living through a profound crisis with the pandemic, with the economic crisis, and the crisis of world imperialism. And I don't think we should forget, it's not just a crisis in this country. The economic crisis that the Ukrainian war is exacerbating, where there's mass poverty, it's bad enough here, but imagine if you're in Sri Lanka or some other countries where it's having a big impact, and where people are beginning to protest and take up arms and trying to overthrow their governments. There's a lot going on, and we should recognise that. But it's no accident they've tried to rush through the acceptance of the King, and it's no accident that he's already announced that William will be the Prince of Wales, although that's upset a lot of people in Wales. You know, it's no accident, because they're trying to, as Tina said, they're trying to make us still believe in the divine right of kings, and that they're not mere mortals like the rest of us. They were born to rule, and that's part of what this quickness has been about as well. But the contradictions in the economic system and in capitalism are coming home to roost. And you've seen all this spectacle of wealth. I mean, what sickened me today, I happened to watch some of it. I think it was Angela Rayner sitting next to Ian Duncan Smith, and they seem very pally-pally. Well, I hate Ian Duncan Smith for what he's done to us people with disabilities and working class people. I hate him with a vengeance, and that sickened my stomach. I mean, I'm not 100% sure it was her, but I think it definitely was. But that really sickened me. But the question I've got, a lot of the left still don't understand why we need to tackle the monarchy and overthrow the crown. And we should not forget what happened in places like Chile, where they didn't overthrow the state. It was easier for imperialism and America to then overthrow the government. So I think there are big opportunities, but we have to be bold. And people are really suffering, really suffering. They're not sure how they're going to, even now, before it goes up on the 1st of October, people are struggling. If you, like me, pay on a meter, if you've got no money, you can use your £10 of credit they give you, then you're cold. You have no gas, you have no lighting. And that's what's happening to loads of people. And people are not eating properly and things like that. So you've got that on one hand, the living experience of a lot of us, when you see the obscene wealth. And what's one of the first things this new Chancellor's going to do? Is going to enable the bankers to get even more bonuses. Now, a lot of us are still angry that they got bailed out in the way that they did, so they're going to be able to rip us off even more. So I think there's all these contradictions that we can actually utilise to actually bring about a mass change in consciousness, which is what I think is happening anyway. And the industrial action is going to be on the increase, and people are prepared to just lie on their bellies anymore. They're going to get up and fight because they know we have to do that. So I'm fairly optimistic that we can do some major damage to the ruling class in this country and internationally over the next period. The other thing is Biden's upsetting the apple cart again. He's threatening China again. You know, and apparently the White House has said, no, we haven't changed our policy. So he's speaking out of turn a bit So, you know, there's lots of dangers, but there's also possibilities.
I think a war against China is very much on the cards, and that's what the whole Ukraine situation is about. Marion, we are all struggling to work out how we're going to organize the resistance, and the lack of a political representation is obviously an issue. Where do you see the left? Where's the party of the left? How are we going to build it?
Well, I think what we have to do, which is something I've thought for some time, we've got to start building more in our communities, as well as having the political fight in our trade unions and in the Labour Party. We've got to organise among where we live, the people where we live, raise our socialist ideas, raise with them that there are alternatives. And I think if we can start to do that more, then I think we will have a big impact. But I think that will happen anyway, because we're going to have to organise locally. We're going to have to build our communities again. And I think if we can do that, as well as doing the political fight that we need to have within our trade unions and within the Labour Party, we can construct a new party of the left out of those processes. That's how I think we can do it.
Thanks, Marion. Graham, I was going to ask you something on that. Most of us were in the Crispin Fintroff show yesterday, which was quite interesting. Actually, had Ken Loach and Audrey White were talking about a failure of the left to unite and build something. And Ken Loach, and we had a bit of a discussion about that, Ken Loach was proposing a independent labor movement, I think he called it, coming from the unions. I was a bit skeptical because I can't see the unions building a party that would allow individual membership, which would probably, challenge some of the trade union bureaucrats with their big wages and lack of democracy, etc. You were a bit more positive about that suggestion, weren't you?
I was. I mean, I think Ken was premature and it's not totally worked out. But I mean, any resistance will have to be primarily based on the trade unions. That doesn't mean to say only on the trade unions or on what we call trade unionism. I mean, the important thing about what we're now seeing, just the beginnings of it, is that some of the trade unions are beginning to try to enter into the political field, to fill the vacuum that has been caused by the total absence of any Labour Party worth the name. And I think that's important. I suppose I go back, and I'm not out just to repeat history, but when the Labour Party was born, it was born of an alliance of the trade unions and the socialists. And I think that a similar coalition is going to have to develop between the trade unions and the socialists in order to fight, well, firstly, to build the resistance. I think Marion's absolutely right. The epicenter of struggle is in our communities, in our trade unions, on the streets, wherever. It's on the ground that the resistance will come. But you can't just leave it there. What starts in the streets can't just remain in the streets. It needs some form of political representation. And that means possibly the Labour Party, or it may not. I mean, everything that exists will one day die. And I don't think this is business as usual. I wasn't very impressed by some of the comments on the Crispin show that told us, well, this has all happened before. Remember, one comrade said, just before people were saying this, and then Corbyn was elected leader, as if that is remotely possible in the immediate future. So it's not business as usual. But I think people are going to be careful here. We're in an interregnum. The old world is dying, the new is waiting to be born, as Gramsci put it. So true. And the exact forms of political representation are not clear. So I think we build the resistance, we fight for political representation within the Labour Party if we may, but outside if we must. And when we built the LRC, the Labour Representation Committee, at the beginning of the century, 20 years ago now, we always had this plan B, that whatever we were trying to do may have to find some expression outside the Labour Party. But what I'm sure about is that the resistance can't just be an amalgam of left-wing groups. That will be hopeless. I think it's got to be the socialist groups and the trade unions and the community organisations and the anti-racist organisations building a new coalition. And I think it's that kind of coalition that will have to change the world. There's no alternative. And whatever our views about trade union leaders, bureaucrats, etc., that movement has to be primarily based on the trade union movement. So I sort of agreed with the general thrust of what Ken was saying. I think perhaps his timing's a bit wrong, but to raise those issues now, I think is entirely correct. And we leave out what I don't want us to do is, oh, it must be in the Labour Party or it must be outside the Labour Party. I think that's a bit of a hopeless way of looking at it. We build the resistance, try to give it political representation where we can.
In Russia, of course, it was a Marxist party that led the revolution rather than the trade unions. But let's.
Yeah, this tragically is not Russia.
Okay, Tony wants to come in.
Okay, yes, thank you, comrades. I mean, I agree with Marion and indeed everyone else that the ostentatious display of wealth by the monarchy in contrast to the poverty of her or his subjects is mind-blowing. But then we see millions either queuing up to see the Queen's coffin or glued to their TV. And then we see the power of the monarchy as an ideological institution. And that is something we cannot simply ignore. And that is one of the problems that face us. We understand that, but unfortunately the masses don't. The question is really how we overcome that. I put that forward as one comment. The second thing is I think we see also the attempt to erase memory of Charles himself and his past misdoings. For example, that Panorama interview with Diana on the most bogus of pretexts, despite the fact that she affirmed that she had no problem with it and stood by every word of it. The BBC has effectively disappeared it. I've got a copy on my blog, but I've had to use special means to actually ensure that it's not taken down because YouTube takes down every single copy. Likewise, Charles carrying, if you remember, carrier bags full of cash back from Qatar. That story has also disappeared. Also, and I'm putting up a blog tonight on some of these things, also disappeared, of course, is Charles's protection of paedophiles, not simply Jimmy Savile, but Peter Ball, the Bishop of Lewis, for which he was criticised by an official inquiry. He bent over backwards to protect him, including buying a home for him on the Duchy of Cornwall estate and renting it out to him and saying how grievously hurt he was at the terrible things that had been done to you. Eventually, Peter Ball went to jail for 32 months, of which he served half after a string of child abuse attacks and so on. But all of this, of course, has not been mentioned in the bourgeois press at all. And I think we understand why that is so. On the question that Graham has just dealt with, the trade unions and so on and so forth, we're not, of course, in 1901, either in Britain or in Russia. And we have to devise our own strategies. And we have to really, if you like, come up with some original thinking in a sense. I mean, I don't think you can ignore the Labour Party, obviously, because it has the allegiance still of the majority of the working class. But I also don't think you can change it or that it is any longer something that the left can gain control of. I think Starmer has managed to ensure, and the Labour right has managed to assure, that the left will never, ever regain control of it, even nominally, which is what it was under Corbyn. Corbyn never had real power in the Labour Party because the civil service wouldn't allow him to have real power. And the right fought a bitter fight, which, you know, contrasts with the campaign group who barely put up a feeble protest. So what should our strategy be? I think it's right to campaign for unions to break the link with the Labour Party. If the Labour Party is now a reactionary institution, there is really no point in the unions having that link. On the contrary, it can only hold them back. The question then arises as to what we put in its place. And I think we have to, I don't have the answers, or all the answers anyway, but we really do need to think about the creation of a mass workers' party. And obviously what's happened in the past 2 weeks does, I think, give us some hope. There are anti-monarchist and Republican sentiments, and I think they will be growing. I mean, over 1/4 of the population already says they don't want a monarchy. That rises to nearly half amongst young people. So I don't think we should be too despondent, but we do have to be realistic about our own strength and what the situation at the moment portends. And of course, we have a mass, if you like, impoverishment of the working class this winter and throughout because of the trusts. I mean, well, not just trusts, but her answers will make it much worse. I should add, I mean, I attended a national meeting of Don't Pay UK last night. It was the first such mass meeting of the organisation nationally. And there are 400 groups already in existence around the UK. It's controlled by anarchists. All the stuff on the Crispin show is absolute nonsense from Ben Timberley, has nothing to do with the AWL or whatever. I think the left should be there. I mean, the anarchists don't have a clue as to strategy, and I think that's where the left comes in. So we actually do have to get our hands dirty. I'll leave it at that, but I hope I've given some food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Jackie, Graham, Mike, anybody want to reply?
I mean, just one thing I wanted to say in response to that, but actually, is that I don't think we should be too overawed by these sort of massive crowds either. I mean, it doesn't take very many people to be a massive crowds. What has struck me is the fact that not my friends, I'm not talking about my friends who tend to be of a particular kind of subset, but literally nobody I have met has spoken about it in the terms that they're talking about in TV. In fact, everybody who's commented on it has been frustrated or to the point of anger. None of my kids' friends are talking about it like this. And I also think to myself, those kind of crowds who go up for a lot of reason, including this deification thing. It becomes a kind of cultish sort of deification thing. It wouldn't take much for most of those people to totally change their minds. So I'm not concerned. I still don't feel that the majority of people were enthusiastic about what we've just seen in the last 10 days.
Graham.
Yeah, well, interesting stuff from Tony. Break the link. Well, not yet, Tony. Not yet until we've at least built the embryo of an alternative Labour Party, because otherwise you'll be getting individual trade unions separately making decisions to quit the Labour Party, which will actually, in the absence of an alternative, which we still have to build, would mean them quitting to some extent the political scene, although we've seen that trade unions can play a political role through Mick Lynch and all of that stuff. So I think it may well come to that. I'm not ruling it out at all. And I don't think that the Labour Party is forever the be-all and end-all of our political horizons. God forbid that it is. And I tend to agree with your view, by the way, that it's very, very, very difficult for us to contemplate a situation in which the left could ever recover even the semblance of control over the party. But firstly, if you're going to take this view about breaking the link, it's got to be collected by a lot of the unions together. And it mustn't just be to leave the Labour Party without at least the embryo of an alternative being built, or else it's the road to syndicalism and it's the road to nowhere. So there's germs of truth in all of this, and we're all struggling for exact answers, but not yet, comrade, but it really could be on the agenda, even in my lifetime.
Mike.
Just on the events of the last week, I think Jackie's right. The ruling class went to great lengths, particularly over the last few years, to nourish a cult of personality around the Queen. And she was almost a kind of tabula rasa that people could project their every hope and fear and anxiety. And obviously, you know, her office played that very well. They knew that the best way to gain that kind of adulation is to be everything to everybody, because you're essentially a cinema screen that people project their hopes and fears on. I don't think Charles, with the kind of history that people are describing and the kind of personality that we know he has, is going to be able to resist interventions into the public field that are inevitably going to make him a much more contentious figure, especially with the multiple crises that we know are already with us, but are going to intensify over the next few months. Just on the political question, I've no doubt that people are doing this in their own localities, but something that we have been, the left in and out of the Labour Party in Edinburgh, I'd be very, very keen to do, and have done really effectively. And you've seen this materialising practically on the kind of turnouts on picket lines, not just in the numbers, but who has shown up in picket lines. All these kind of community organisations that we've been mentioning in terms of rebuilding power and confidence and organisational capacity in working class communities are filtered through Edinburgh Trades Council. So there is a coming together of organic grassroots campaigns around poverty, services and so on, with the organised trade unions. And you see that, as I say, with the kind of people and organisations who are showing up. I tend to agree with Graham's analysis of where we are with the Labour Party. It's tempting, of course, particularly if you've been expelled or you have felt so alienated by the party, to look at the party as dead and gone, as a Monty Python parrot. But it's important that, because it is such a volatile time, it's important that we don't run ahead of events and begin to formulate political organisations and parties that, who knows, within 6 months, a year, may find themselves redundant and behind the historical curve. So yeah, I think as difficult a pill as it is to swallow for a great many people, until the trade union movement make a formal decision to leave the Labour Party and to seek out political partners elsewhere, and that may well be happening. And of course, Shan Graham and others and Mick Lynch have implied that day may not be sooner than we think. But until that day comes, I think it's premature to be sounding the death knell of the party.
We should also, I think, remember that 30,000 people in the Labour Party voted for left-wing NEC candidates. So it's not all, you know, gone. That's still a lot more people than are organised outside the Labour Party. Something will have to change, but yes, we should probably be careful not to do it too prematurely. Katerina wants to come in, but I think you got something wrong with your... There you are. Hello.
Hi. I guess that, I don't know, is a question. I was a delegate at the last conference, and it was horrendous. It was the worst experience of my life. But I was looking at this conference this year. And yes, no matter how ludicrous it is having to sing the national anthem, I found the Ukraine kind of a deal breaker for me. I understand working within the party, but this promotion of NATO from the Labour Party, now that the situation is as it is quite problematic for me, because, well, Europe is decaying slowly. Today they sanction, but what they're pushing Hungary out of Europe. But the situation in Moldova, Georgia are ludicrous. They are trying to start the war in Serbia, in Armenia. Pelosi was there today, I think. Well, half of Europe won't have the gas to survive industrially, at least 1 year, never mind the 3 they are calculating. And we are talking to support, you know, an horrendous situation in which the US is firing and starting fires anywhere they can, and starting a color revolution anywhere they can to try to stave off the loss of the dollar and the control of the dollar. It is dangerous. There is not a positive outcome. There is nothing good that come out of this. And I'm expected as a Labour member to subscribe to a motion which associate me with a side of what is going to be a global war, maybe made of different small regional fires. As long as the fire is not under us, we are okay. And that's not true. Because economically, we are going to lose as the West anyway. And militarily, there'll be millions are going to be involved. So what do I do as a Labour member? Do we have a red line? And that is my question. And for me, I'm not British, so I don't have to sing any anthem, but that motion is a bit of a red line. That's my question. Do we have one?
Good question. Jackie, do you think there's any red lines?
Yeah, well, I think you've actually hit on something quite interesting, because I don't think he's doing this just for, shall we say, getting to the Tory vote. I don't think that's all it's about. I mean, what are the left MPs going to do when the national anthem comes on and he's making tributes to the monarchy? Because actually what's going to happen is that they've got a very simple choice. They either make sure they're not in the conference room, and that will be noticed, of course, and that's a kind of easy way out. Or they sit down, or they join in. As soon as they join in, they've undermined their position with the left. And I mean, actually, this is Starmer's faction way of drawing their red lines. And I actually tend to think, really, this is about times. You know, if we don't get some of the left MPs, you know, like standing up against this one, then I really don't know what they're for. I mean, I think they will lose so much credibility at that point. But, you know, they've got this theory that all they've got to do is, you know, be good and be quiet. And then in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, they'll be allowed their turn again. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
There's, of course, MPs like Sam Terry, who stood up in Parliament and paid tribute to the Queen, which was absolutely cringeworthy. I took it out of the intro from this show, but it's still on the intro of our last show. It was disgusting. And he'll stand up and sing the national anthem, won't he?
Yeah, I mean, none of that surprised me about Sam Terry. I've worked with Sam Terry, and I know people made all this, you know, how wonderful he was, you know, recently. But my experience of Sam Terry was that he was the most self-ambitious person. And I've met a few, as we all have in politics. He was the most ambitious person I had ever met in politics. You know, he would do and say sort of pretty much anything, really. And I think that tells you a lot about what that embarrassing speech in Parliament was about.
Yeah, he's trying to have a strange position there. He's on the one hand, he wants to do the, you know, the picket thing, and on the other hand, he wants to appeal to the right. I think he thinks he's quite clever, but I think he pisses off everybody.
Yeah, quite.
Comrades, we've forgotten to mention earlier on, and it's quite important, is Patreon, which we need to get some money in. We've got about 49 patrons, which is brilliant, actually, and paying about £244 every month, which is about half of what we need every month to become self-sustaining. So if you got a few quid left over a month, I know it's difficult times, but we do appreciate every small donation. So we need about 400 really as a basic, and then anything extra would be much appreciated. Thank you, comrades. Steve, please.
Thank you, Tina. I suppose we could have abolished.
Oh, sorry, Steve. I think I made that by mistake.
Sorry, I'll start again. I'm going to say we could have abolished the monarchy in 1649, or maybe in 1848, or perhaps even in 1918, but we didn't. So something's obviously gone wrong, because there's no particular reason why we should have one, but we've silly got one, and we've had 70 years of fantastic monarchical success. Or to put it the other way around, we've had 70 years of failure. We actually need to analyze the 70 years of failure that has taken place since 1952. What has really gone wrong? And it's quite interesting, because I agree with what some of the comrades have said. Jackie said this, and Tony as well. We're divided 2/3, 1/3. I think 2/3 are in favour of the monarchy. I call them the Tory nation. They believe in the monarchy, they believe in the union, they believe in the established church, they believe in the empire and all those sorts of things. And then you've got 1/3 of people who are not, really don't think they're subjects. They may be their citizens, some vague idea that they don't go along with this. And you can only see that, by the way, and it's interesting, in Celtic. Why did we get that in Celtic? Was this Scottish republicanism happening at that football ground? Obviously not. The reason the Celtic fans were making those noises because of the long history of struggle, but of Irish republicanism, which has fed into Scotland. And that's what's different. We don't have anything like that in England. So there's much more republicanism where there's struggle. There's an absence of republicanism where there is no struggle. The 1/3 people that might be Republican, who's their voice? We can't hear anything from them. Where's the Republican Party in England? There isn't one. Where is the programme? I mean, they got rid of the Tsar, didn't they? Because they had the RSDLP, which was a Republican Socialist Party, by the way, and fought for a long period to actually do that and to achieve it. So what are the 70 years of failure? Let's come back to that then. First of all, the social monarchy established in 1945, that's failed. And trying to revive it, which is what Corbyn was doing, trying to restore the 1945 social monarchy, that didn't work. And now we're in a situation where we've got food banks, where we've got almost the collapse of the whole system. So that's been a complete catastrophe. Then we've got the union and the constitution, which is more or less broken and collapsed. The union will not survive. That's why they're stressing it so much. So the constitution is not working. We're going to end up, we're moving towards a dictatorship. English republicanism has been absolutely useless, by the way. What they think is Charles will be, if you look to Republic, they think that Charles will be so useless and so terrible that will deliver us with a republic. No, it won't. The only way you're going to get a republic is if you organize for it and you form a party that will actually go out and do that and campaign for it and turn that passive republicanism into active or militant republicanism. And then the last point is this: the socialist movement has completely and utterly failed for 70 years in challenging the monarchy or the crown. And my last point really is to say this. We've had Corbynism, which has had virtually no republicanism at all. And then you have people like the SWP who preach revolution, not a republic, but they preach revolution. So they have a kind of ultra-left approach to this. But the big failure, and I will finish on this, Tina, is not to draw the distinction between the monarchy and the crown. The monarchy is just the king or the queen. And in some ways, it's in decline. The crown is the power of the state. It's hugely powerful. Actually, the crown is becoming more powerful. It's the power of capital. It's Her Majesty's Treasury. It's the Bank of England. And that is powerful. And we've seen the crown, not just the king, on display. When we see the soldiers marching down there, it's a military display. It's a church display. It's a display of all features of the crown. And it's a very powerful display to overawe the population in the way that they've done. So I think we have to have a different kind of republicanism to what we failed for 70 years to do anything about. We really got to look at that. And we need a Republican Party, comrades. Whether that's the Labour Party or another party, I really don't know. I don't think it means we don't fight in the Labour Party for that, or we fight outside. But there has to be a different kind of party. So going back to Corbyn's 2017 social monarchy programme, restore the 1945 social monarchy, I'm sorry, that is not going to work now, because the crisis is that much deeper. I'll finish there.
Put your finger on it when you described the RSDLP as a Republican Socialist Party.
Yes,
that was
absolutely.
the important bit. Jackie.
I just want to add that I've just seen come up that Jacinta has just announced that New Zealand is going to start the process of becoming a republic. And so she's not even home. She's not even had her dinner yet at the palace. And she's jumped in, and we're going to see them all coming down now. We're seeing the breakup of the Commonwealth. And the next thing we'll see as well is the breakup of the United Kingdom. And then we're going to see, and I actually do think it's important, although, you know, with all the provisos that Graham says, and somebody has just said, you know, do we really think they're going to allow us to discuss this on the media? Actually, if the mass of the people are wanting this, if the Commonwealth is falling to pieces, they're going to have no choice. And that's why they're so frightened. So I'm voting for New Zealand, mate, and for everything else that follows.
Two things quickly I was going to say on that. I think the breakup of the UK probably will happen. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, and it's.
I'm not saying it is necessarily, but I'm saying what they're seeing is that their whole project of this kind of central control is gradually disintegrating. Who knows what's going to come from it? But actually, when we see a time like this, when everything is changing, that's always an opportunity politically.
It is. There's also an opportunity for the right, of course, or for nationalism to raise its very ugly head, and, you know, to split the historically constituted working class in Britain would be, I think, quite potentially a problem. Socialism, like capitalism, has to be international, doesn't it? We don't want to become smaller and smaller. We actually want to reach out. Go on, Graham, speak.
No, I was thinking that there's a problem. I'm not prepared to say anything about that at this stage. I think that we should be discussing this in future.
Oh yeah, good idea. We should definitely. It's an
but
important issue.
I have to say, I've got to be honest on that one. I'm right on the fence.
Ooh, another one. I like Graham when he's on the fence. That's always very interesting. The other thing I was going to say when Steve Freeman spoke, we've had discussions on this in the past, is there's of course nothing inherently progressive about a republic necessarily. Germany is a republic, the USA is a republic, Israel is a republic, and they are, of course, not an inch more democratic than Britain is today. The question is how you achieve that republic. So just having a Republican Party, or a Republican movement, or a republic is not going to solve the issue of, you know, how we're ruled or capitalism, etc. So there are all sorts of issues. Like in Germany, they did away with the monarchy, as in Russia, through a revolution that did away with all sorts of other things. So I think we always have to keep that in mind, that our republicanism is one for socialism as well. That doesn't mean we just say revolution and everything else will be sorted by itself, but that, you know, republicanism is a part of our program for socialism. Otherwise it becomes a bit of a useless, you know, bourgeois republicanism, I think. Okay, Anthony wants to come in. Anthony hasn't spoken yet, but Marion and Steve want a second bite of the cherry then. Okay, Anthony, speak slowly, please, comrade. Hi.
Anthony Brain. I think we all agree on a lot of things, but the ruling class, as Steve said, is terribly split, and the divisions could deepen over Scotland, Ireland, the EU. I mean, she never met Biden yesterday, so that battle could be going on. I thought the media yesterday or the other couple of days were trying to get rid of Truss, because she's not carrying out the main interests of the ruling class. I think Charles III is on that wing of the ruling class. But the fight for we can't underestimate I think you can see, if you listen to the Labour Left Alliance, or listen to the past talks by Kevin Bean, and what he said is, and Trotsky's writings, the whole trade union bureaucracy, social democracy and New Labour are tied up with working within the capitalist framework, and then a key institution of that is the monarchy, and you saw that in all its so that's a major danger of adaptation to the trade union bureaucracy, and I think that's a very important danger that can be seen. The other danger is to move out the Labour Party prematurely before the historic split happens. But now with the capitalist crisis, the ecological crisis, I mean, I think what's her name, Catherine has talked about the dangers of war with Serbia, because what Putin said on that, if Yeltsin wouldn't part with what Yeltsin when they bombed in 1999, there'd be a third world war, and Biden's threatening to use American troops against China in time is very dangerous, man. Didn't spell that out, but before I spelled that out. And some of the tensions Catriona said there's a big danger of a third world war. The anti-war movement isn't doing what it's doing. There's probably with the no Cold War campaign with the silence, but I'm more with them despite that than the official stop the war that's right. But people like Tina are seeing the dangers more. And whatever I do with regards to stop a nuclear war, I think that's important. But I think the class war is going to sharpen up very closely, because I think the display in the media shows the insecurity of the ruling class. They're going hysterical. They're finally being overthrown. They're fighting each other. If you read issue of the Russian Revolution by Trotsky, it shows the interlude between the king and the queen in the French and Russian Revolution and all the psychology. That's why it's a very good book and read as well as Marxist writing on France. But I think Lenin and Trotsky saw the point of the fight against the monarchy and Trotsky with the Poland Revolution, because like today, the monarchy is going to be, why does the capitalists have the monarchy in order to suppress the working class? And that's why the working class got crushed in 1905 with their naivety. They finished the monarchy then, but the liberal capitalists saved it. Trotsky agreed with Lenin on that. And then, but I think Tina's correct. Republicans are money sound. We might be winning the middle class Republican, but we never work with the capitalist Republicans in a popular front. But Tina's quite correct on its own. But Lenin, whenever the Trotsky and the Poland Revolution, we mustn't repeat what the Stalinists do. Use Lenin's pre-1917 stages theory in order to make deals with capitalism. We fight for a workers' republic. Combine those bourgeois democratic attempts with the socialists, and it's dangerous, Steve, of echoing the Lenin's pre-1917 stages theory. There's all kinds of danger. We're now moving towards class independence, but we need to have these debates out more, but I'll leave it there.
Thanks, comrade. I think it's important, and I think we have to revisit the issue of World War III and China, and that what's happening there. This is going to become a huge, huge issue, and of course it links with Ukraine and our energy prices, etc., which is quite astounding that people across Europe seem to be just taking it and not really linking it to that war in Ukraine. Marion wants to have a second bite of the cherry. Come on then.
Yeah, I think it's quite important that we don't act prematurely as far as the Labour Party is concerned, because I would be very worried if that was to happen without an alternative being well formulated. I mean, I'm someone that in the CWU has fought time and time again to stop disaffiliation, not because the Labour Party is the best thing since sliced bread, but there would be a real danger of going back to syndicalism if we don't recognise the need for a political voice for the working class. The other thing I think we have to realise is, I mean, some people call it the combined revolution, but if you look at the situation for women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, to name just a few, their struggles are going to intercede and are interceding already with working class struggles, and there will be all these are revolutionary potential that we have to seize upon. Now, I think if we are doing what we should be doing. See, I don't think Brexit would have happened in the form that it happened if the left and the Labour and trade union movement had been doing what it should have been doing in a lot of these working class communities that felt totally disenfranchised. Nobody was speaking to them. So some bugger like, excuse my language, some person like Nigel Farage, if you can call him a person, can get hold of those kind of people, and that needn't have been the case. So that's why I do think working strongly in our own communities and building that up is one of the tasks that we need to do. But the main thing is internationalism. Let's not forget that if we don't actually overthrow capitalism and imperialism internationally, then we will fail. You cannot build socialism in one country or a series of countries. That's impossible. And the last 100 years have shown that time and time again. So we need to actually develop the battle internationally and have our international solidarity. And somebody put in there that we should be doing a lot more to get Assange free. And I think that is one of the top things. He is paying the price for exposing the capitalist and the imperialist and the warmongers. And it's also an attack on democracy and freedom of the press. So we should be doing a lot more than we've been doing on that one. But the key thing is we do have to recognise the role that the Crown plays in the state. And unless we overthrow that power, we will be doomed. So I do think it's important, but as Auntie said, it's not just fighting for a republic. We have to put context on that. And I would fight for Soviets or working class democracy. I wouldn't just fall for a republic. But that's part of the debate we need to have. But we do have to not be hoodwinked with all this crap that we've got in this country now with the monarchy. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Marina. I think Marx and Engels, when they wrote about republicanism, they always specified the republic is the form that the workers' state will take, and that's why we're Republicans. Thanks, Marion. Okay, Steve, then.
I've now moved. Just to come back, Tina, on that discussion, I think two things. We have to compare presidential republics. Presidential republics are essentially elected monarchies. Really, the executive power rests with Trump or whoever it is, who's almost like an elected king. And you've got a massive bureaucratic system. There's no democracy really in most presidential republics. So we're not really arguing for a presidential republic, we're arguing for a democratic republic, i.e. one which is based on the people themselves being organised. And of course, since the working class is the majority, that obviously means the organisation of the working class. There's no real democratic republics in the world today, but we've seen examples of it, the most famous being the Paris Commune. That wasn't a socialist society, the Paris Commune, but it had very advanced forms of democracy, even albeit for a very short period of time. So we're not talking about having a bureaucratic republic. We're talking about having one that is thoroughly and consistently, in its political and military and all those other forms, democratic. It's consistent democracy that we're talking about now. So just to set that aside so we know, and if we do that, by the way, that rolls over because the people want that to be a social republic, i.e. one that deals with the social conditions in which they are living, because they'll have the power to do that. Of course, the republic is not an event. It's not like one day, the 25th of November, somebody gets up and says, here's the abdication of King Charles, and now we're a republic, and then everything carries on. That moment, and the moment will presumably happen, is merely the beginning. It's like the door opens on a struggle to find out what kind of republic it's going to be, because the old regime has gone and we haven't quite decided what the new regime will be. So in a way, the republic is merely at that level, that purely formal level, is the door opening on the struggle for democracy. So we want the door to open. So we promote republicanism to open the door to a different type of political system than the one we've got. And that's what happened in Russia, by the way. The February Republic wasn't the end, it was the door opening. And it went on, and it went further, and eventually went on to October, etc. So you had a very intense period of struggle. Well, you could have had fascism, by the way. So when the door opens, fascism will turn up. It won't just be, oh, the door opens, we're going to have democracy. If the door opens, fascism will turn up at the same time, by the way. And there'll be a very, very intense struggle. And if you read what Lenin said in State and Revolution about this, he simply says that the republic is not the end of the class struggle. It's a kind of beginning of it on a higher level, on a more intensified level. So which is not bourgeois republicanism, it's a republicanism that links to the struggle of the working class.
Thanks, Steve. Mike, do you want to speak first? I think.
I just want to quote Keir Hardie very briefly, because I mentioned in the chat box there that the comparison between him and Starmer is quite startling. Hardie spoke a great deal about the royal family and was castigated for it, both inside and outside Parliament. And there's a wonderful wee quote, which I'll just kind of parse, that exemplifies Hardie's approach. The throne represents the power of caste, of class rule. And his language is very blunt. The toady who crawls through the mire of self-abasement to enable him to bask in the smile of royalty is the victim of a diseased organism. we all know, and people are saying this, that we could all sit in our hands, and the left could down tools and stand back and be observers of history. There are struggles coming without us. There's going to be huge trade union struggles. There's going to be struggles around housing, and the ideological ballast that the Crown, and I think Steve's right, it's important to distinguish between individuals and an institution. The Crown is no longer going to have its first 11 on the pitch. Charles is not going to be a convincing ideological guarantor for the system. So the conversation I think we need to start having, because there's going to be Republican conversations coming quite soon, both in terms of the Caribbean countries, Australia, New Zealand. It's going to break the dam, and we are going to begin to be speaking about political alternatives to the current constitutional settlement. I think we do need to get our houses in order and begin to have practical demonstrations, say this is what socialist democracy looks like, rather than speaking in abstract terms about a post-monarchy, a post-crown. Actually begin to think about what a working class republic in workplaces and political systems and education, health and elsewhere, what that would actually look like. And I guess that could potentially be a job for Redline TV and other socialist platforms to begin to map out what our democracy looks like compared to their system.
Thanks, Mike. Graham.
Oh, that was an interesting discussion. I just wanted to say that I sort of agreed with what Marion said, a word of caution about just leaving the Labour Party without an alternative. I know I've said this, but I understand where this is coming from. We need to be impatient, of course. Time's running out for us all. Time's running out for the planet. And we haven't, I mean, I used to say years ago, we've got to lay down traditions for future generations. But unless we change things soon, there won't be future generations to learn any lessons. So I get it. But I think my view is basically this. I think there's likely, not certain, but it's likely to be a Starmer government of sorts. With an emerging resisting trade union movement, that could be a huge clash. And if I'm right, we don't know this, but it could well determine the relationship between the Labour and the trade unions, that Labour government. And I just want us to be there on both sides of that kind of divide. In the trade unions, socialists in the trade unions and socialists in the Labour Party, so that whatever split there is, and I think probably there is going to be some kind of split, but who knows, is on the best possible balance of forces. Now is not the time to leave that arena of struggle. But I do agree, there is a need for impatience, but just a little bit of caution as well. So I tended to agree, I think, with the thrust, if I understood it, with what Marion was saying.
Thank you, comrades, for what I thought was a very interesting discussion. I mean, it's no surprise that we ended up talking about the monarchy a lot, because that, ruined our plans to look at the Truss government. But then, of course, the Truss government has been very quiet the last few days, planning its onslaught on the working class, no doubt. And as Marion mentioned, and we should have mentioned, the sneaking in of, the bonus cap being withdrawn, fracking being made legal, etc. Though they've snuck a few things in already, and Bill of Rights being withdrawn because they want to have more attacks on trade union democracy and working class representation, as well as the some of the European legislation to protect workers will be ripped up apparently. So there is a lot will be happening in the future, and we will be taking another look at that. Not next week, because next week most of us will be in Liverpool, not at Labour Party conference because we're not allowed in anymore, but there is a conference called Future of the Left, which is happening, which is organized by a few comrades on the left in Liverpool. If you can join us there, please do. Jackie, do you want to tell us a little bit about why it's important, why you're getting involved in it?
Well, because you're certainly not going to be able to talk about politics at the Labour conference. And I think it's really important to be there and to be seeing what's going to go on and actually have some spontaneous comment, as well as bringing the left together. And there's going to be some fantastic speakers there. So you can do come. It's a Zoom show. Just have a look for the link.
Yeah. Wednesday, the 28th of September is going to be a big meeting, 3 big meetings actually in Liverpool. If you're in Liverpool, you can join us then. Monday and Tuesday is going to be online only, but we're having some of the issues we've discussed in this show and other shows, Ukraine, free speech, war on woke, the Ford report, etc. All of us will be involved. There's also Craig Murray, Stella Assange, Andrew Feinstein, Asa Winstanley, Tony Greenstone will be there, all sorts of other comrades, Steve Freeman as well will be there. So if you can, get your tickets now, because they cost money, unfortunately, because there's a lot of technology involved. So if you can get your tickets and help out with that. And Wednesday then. The show after that will probably, depending on what the situation is like, be looking at the various conferences, Tory and Labour Party conference, and where that leaves us and where it leaves the left, how we should organise, if that changes anything in our view towards the Labour Party. There will be various attacks we hear on members in the Labour Party. The few rights they still have are being undermined further. Watch the space. Comrades, the struggle continues. See you soon. Have a good evening, comrade.